Are your grocery bills going up? Are you struggling to stretch your Social Security or SNAP benefits to the end of the month? Do you feel like every month your dollar just doesn't go as far as it used to? Well, you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. A new government report just revealed that inflation is rising again, and in response, our President Donald Trump is now publicly demanding that the Federal Reserve immediately cut interest rates by a massive 3%. Meanwhile, the bond market is reacting nervously and the Fed is pushing back. This might sound like Washington drama, but let me assure you, it directly affects you, especially if you're on a fixed income, rely on Social Security, use SNAP for groceries, or need Medicaid for medical care. So in today's video, we're going to unpack this economic storm in simple terms, what's happening, why it matters, and most importantly, what it means for your benefits and daily expenses. I'll explain what the CPI report showed, why tariffs are a major factor, how Trump's demands might impact your pocketbook, and what the Federal Reserve is really planning to do next. And if you have any questions about how this affects your situation, whether it's about SNAP, SSI, SSDI, or anything else, please ask in the comments. I'm here to help you stay informed step by step. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is the government's official measure of inflation. It tracks the prices of hundreds of everyday items like food, clothing, rent, and gas. In June, the CPI jumped from 2.4% in May to 2.7%. That may seem like a small increase, but in economic terms, it's significant. A jump of 0.3% in a single month suggests that inflation is gaining speed again after slowing down earlier in the year. What's more worrying is the core CPI, which excludes food and energy, the most volatile categories. That number increased from 2.8% to 2.9%. The Federal Reserve watches this number closely because it tends to reflect deeper, longer-term inflation trends. When core inflation goes up, it signals a more entrenched cost of living increase, and that's bad news for anyone living on a fixed income. This is especially hard on people who rely on Social Security, SSI, or SSDI. These programs are designed to provide stability, but they don't always keep up with rapid price increases. Even if your benefits go up a little through a COLA, cost of living adjustment, they often lag behind the real rate at which your bills are rising. So what's driving this inflation? One major culprit: tariffs. Tariffs are taxes placed on goods imported from other countries. The idea is to encourage people to buy American-made products, but in reality, they often lead to higher prices for everyone. That's because businesses importing goods, everything from clothing to electronics to groceries, have to pay these taxes up front. And what do they do in response? They pass those costs on to consumers. Some economists argue that right now, tariffs might not be fully inflationary. Why? Because American consumers are already stretched thin. When prices go up, people stop buying. In that case, businesses can't raise prices too much or they'll lose customers. So some retailers are choosing to eat the tariff cost temporarily to avoid losing sales. But this is only a short-term solution, and it's not sustainable. What we're seeing now is that tariffs are starting to push prices higher, especially on imported goods. That means SNAP dollars don't stretch as far, rent is creeping up, and basic household goods from clothes to furniture are getting more expensive. And here's the alarming part. The worst tariffs haven't even started yet. The biggest wave is scheduled to go into effect on August 1st, after being delayed twice already. If these tariffs go into place, inflation could accelerate even further, meaning higher prices at the store and even more pressure on families relying on benefits. When you look closer at the data, it's clear who's being hit hardest. Food prices are up by 3%, a huge burden on SNAP recipients. Whether you shop at Walmart, Aldi, or your local grocery store, the prices of basic items like bread, milk, vegetables, and eggs have all increased. This means you're getting less food for the same SNAP allotment, or you're forced to choose between quality and quantity. Shelter costs, that includes rent, have increased by 3.8%. If you're living in low-income housing, Section 8 or senior housing, you might not see this immediately, but if your rent is market-based or you're on a wait list, you're going to feel the squeeze. And since rent is the largest expense for most households, this can put many people on the edge of homelessness. These are not luxury expenses. These are basic human needs. And when inflation affects the most critical categories, food and shelter, it's not just an economic issue. It's a survival issue for people living on Social Security, SNAP, and Medicaid. President Donald Trump responded to the inflation news in a way that surprised many. He called on the Federal Reserve to slash interest rates by 3% immediately. To put this in perspective, a 3% cut is enormous. Most rate changes happen in increments of 0.25%. So asking for 3% is like slamming the gas pedal to the floor. Trump argues that the inflation is very low and that lower interest rates would stimulate the economy. But here's the problem. Cutting rates while inflation is rising can backfire. It can lead to even more inflation, which hits low-income Americans hardest. Your fixed income doesn't automatically rise just because interest rates fall, but prices usually do. This is where it gets complicated. On one hand, lower interest rates can help people with credit card debt or mortgages by reducing monthly payments. On the other hand, it can make the cost of goods and services go up, and it reduces the value of your dollar. So while Trump's call for rate cuts may be intended to help the economy, the short-term impact on benefit recipients could be painful. Right now, the Federal Reserve isn't backing down. They've made it clear that their priority is fighting inflation, not politics. Before the CPI report, there was a 95.3% chance that the Fed would keep interest rates steady at their next meeting on July 30th. After the report, that number rose to 97.4%. In other words, the Fed saw rising inflation and decided it was not the time to cut rates. This decision affects everyone because it shapes the overall economy. When rates are high, loans become more expensive, credit card interest increases, mortgages stay costly, and most importantly for our audience, benefit increases don't keep up with actual living costs. While the Fed may believe it's doing the right thing, the ripple effect on families struggling to make ends meet is real. You're being asked to do more with less. Again, there's another piece of this puzzle that's flying under the radar: the bond market. The 30-year Treasury yield has now climbed above 5%. That's a warning sign. When yields go up, it means investors are expecting more inflation ahead, and that often forces the government to change course. In fact, a similar spike in yields earlier this year is what caused Trump to postpone the last round of tariffs. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned him that the bond market was reacting negatively, and it worked. Tariffs were paused. So what happens now? If yields keep rising, we may see another delay. But if Trump goes ahead with the tariffs anyway, expect inflation to rise even more, and that could hit your budget directly. Looking ahead to the September 17th meeting, there's a lot of uncertainty. Before the recent inflation report, there was a 60.3% chance that the Fed would cut rates by then. Now it's down to 55.9%, basically a coin toss. The Fed says it wants to see more data. That means they're waiting to see how the economy behaves in July and August before making any decisions. They're watching inflation, jobs, consumer spending, and market signals before acting. But for those of us who live with monthly benefit checks and limited flexibility, waiting can be devastating. We don't have the luxury of watching the economy from a distance. We live inside it every single day. One of the biggest questions many of you ask is, how does all this affect my benefits? Let's break it down. Social Security COLA, the annual cost of living adjustment, is based on inflation data, but it only looks at specific months, usually July, August, and September. If inflation is high in those months, the COLA might go up in 2025. But if inflation cools off in August or September, your increase may be smaller than what you're actually experiencing day to day. Medicare premiums, rising healthcare costs, and inflation often lead to higher Medicare Part B premiums. So even if you get a COLA bump, much of it might be eaten up by medical costs, leaving you with very little extra in your pocket. SNAP benefits, these are adjusted annually too, based on the cost of the USDA's Thrifty Food Plan. But just like COLA, these adjustments often lag behind reality. That means food prices are rising faster than your benefit increases, leading to tighter food budgets. Inflation always hits low-income households the hardest. You spend a greater share of your income on food, housing, and healthcare, all categories where inflation is rising fastest. Higher-income households might cut back on travel or luxuries, but when you're living on SSI or SSDI, you don't have much left to cut. If SNAP benefits don't cover a full month's groceries, you're already going hungry by week 3. If your rent rises and your Social Security doesn't, you face eviction, not inconvenience. That's why understanding these economic decisions is so important, because you're not just watching from the sidelines. You're in the middle of it. As you can see, everything is connected. Tariffs raise prices, inflation follows, the Fed delays rate cuts, politicians push back, and in the end, it's seniors, families, and low-income Americans who bear the brunt of it all. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or frustrated, you're not alone. The system is complex, but here on Social Security Post, we break it down in a way that makes sense so you know what's happening and how to prepare for what comes next. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, if you have any questions about how these changes affect your Social Security, Medicaid, SSI, SSDI, or SNAP benefits, ask in the comments below. I'll respond as soon as I can with clear, factual answers. Take care of yourself, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.